It was 11 o'clock at night. The kind of quiet that only exists when the whole world has gone to sleep. Sean had just tucked his 6-year-old daughter in, kissed her forehead, and finally let his shoulders drop. The dishes were done. The laundry was folded. Another long day had quietly surrendered to the dark. He was a single dad. Every night ended like this, exhausted, alone, but grateful. Then came the knock. 3 sharp sounds against his front door that didn't belong to that kind of silence. He froze. It was 11 p.m. Nobody knocked at 11 p.m. He opened the door, and the night air rushed in cold against his face. She was standing there, soaking wet, trembling, a small bag hanging from one tight fist. He recognized her immediately. Haley, his ex's boss, a woman he had met exactly twice in his entire life. Her eyes met his, and they were completely shattered. Then she whispered the 6 words that changed everything. I have nowhere else to go. Sean didn't move. He just stood there in the doorway, one hand still gripping the door frame, staring at the woman he barely knew. Haley. He had met her twice, maybe 3 times, always in passing, always in the uncomfortable space that existed between him and his ex, Clara. She was never someone he thought about. And yet here she was, on his porch, at 11 p.m., falling apart in the rain. Every sensible part of him said to be careful. He had a daughter sleeping 20 feet away. He had a life he had fought hard to keep steady. He had walls he had built for very good reasons. But then Haley shivered, one long, helpless shiver that she clearly tried to hide, and something in Sean's chest moved before his brain could stop it. He stepped back. Come inside, he said quietly. She sat at his kitchen table like someone who had forgotten how to take up space. Small, folded inward, hands wrapped around the mug of tea he had placed in front of her without asking. Sean sat across from her and said nothing at first. He had learned, from years of being a father, from years of sitting with his daughter after nightmares, that sometimes silence was the kindest thing you could offer a person. So he waited, and slowly, carefully, Haley began to talk. It had all happened in one night. That was the part that seemed to stun her most, not the pain itself, but the speed of it. She had come home from a work trip to find her apartment locks changed. A note from her landlord explained that her boyfriend, the man whose name was also on the lease, had broken the agreement and vacated. Taken everything. Left nothing but her name on a debt she didn't know existed. She had called her office next. A cold, professional voicemail informed her that her position had been eliminated effective immediately. Restructuring. No severance beyond the legal minimum. The boyfriend had worked in the same company. Sean didn't need her to finish that sentence. He understood exactly what kind of betrayal lived inside it. I didn't know where to go, she said quietly. My family is 3 states away. My friends were his friends. She stopped, looked down at the mug. I remembered your address from an old delivery form Clara had in the office. I know how strange that sounds. I know I have no right to be here. She finally looked up at him. I drove and I ended up here, and I'm so sorry, Sean. He should have felt suspicious. And part of him did. Clara had never spoken warmly about Haley. There had been small comments over the years. Sharp little observations that Sean had filed away without examining too closely. She's ambitious. Calculating. Not someone you want to get too close to. Those words lived somewhere in the back of his mind now, quiet but present. But the woman sitting at his table didn't look calculating. She looked like someone who had just watched their entire life fall through the floor in a single evening. Sean knew that feeling. He had lived inside it for 2 years after his marriage ended. He stood up and moved to the hallway closet, pulled out a folded blanket and the spare pillow he kept for his daughter's sleepovers. The couch pulls out, he said simply. You can stay tonight. Haley blinked. Like the word tonight was more than she had allowed herself to hope for. Just tonight, he added, more for himself than for her. She nodded quickly. Of course. Thank you. He turned off the kitchen light. And as he walked back down the hallway toward his own room, Sean told himself it was just one night. One night couldn't change anything. He almost believed it. One night became 2. 2 became 5. And somewhere between the first morning and the 5th, Sean stopped counting. It started small, the way most things that matter always do. The first morning, Sean had come into the kitchen at 6 a.m., his usual time, expecting to find Haley still asleep on the pull-out couch. Instead, he found coffee already brewing, 2 mugs set out on the counter, and Haley standing at the stove in yesterday's clothes, quietly scrambling eggs like she had done it in that kitchen 100 times before. She looked up when she heard him. I didn't know how you took your coffee, she said. So I left room for whatever you need. It was such a small thing. Such a quietly considerate thing. Sean stood in the doorway for a moment longer than necessary. Black, he said finally. I take it black. She nodded and handed him the mug without another word. And that was how the first morning went. His daughter's name was Lily. She was 6 years old, curious about everything, and absolutely impossible to hide anything from. She had discovered Haley on the second morning, padding out of her bedroom in her dinosaur pajamas, stopping dead in the hallway, and staring at the stranger on the couch with enormous eyes. Sean had braced himself, but Lily had simply tilted her head and asked, "Do you know how to braid hair?" Haley had laughed. A real laugh. Sudden and unguarded. "I do, actually," she said. And that was it. By the time Sean had finished making breakfast, Lily was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor while Haley carefully braided her hair, listening to an extremely detailed story about Lily's best friend at school and the ongoing drama of who got to be line leader. Sean stood in the kitchen doorway again. That same doorway that was becoming a place where he stood and felt things he hadn't planned to feel. The days continued to unfold that way. Quietly. Naturally. Like a song that starts so softly you don't notice it has already changed the atmosphere of the room. Haley was careful not to overstep. She cleaned up after herself. She asked before she used anything. She kept her small bag tucked neatly beside the couch, like she was ready to leave at a moment's notice. But she was also just present. Present in a way that Sean's home had not felt in a long time. She helped Lily with her reading after dinner. She fixed the kitchen cabinet door that had been hanging slightly wrong for 3 months. She sat on the other end of the couch in the evenings while Sean read, not talking, not demanding anything, just existing in the same quiet space. And the silence between them was never uncomfortable. That was the part that unsettled Sean the most. Because he hadn't forgotten Clara's words. They surfaced at odd moments. While he was watching Haley laugh with Lily. While he was noticing how she took her coffee, with too much sugar and a look of genuine pleasure. While he was realizing that he had started looking forward to 6 a.m. She's calculating. Not someone you want to get too close to. He turned those words over in his mind like stones he wasn't sure were hiding something dangerous underneath. Was this what calculating looked like? This woman who folded her own blanket every morning and left room in his coffee mug and never once asked for more than he had already offered? Sean didn't have an answer, but he knew one thing with uncomfortable clarity. The silence she had walked into on that rainy night, she had already filled it. And his home, his careful, controlled, quietly lonely home, had already started to feel different. He just wasn't ready to say the word for what it felt like. It started with Mrs. Patterson next door. She was 72 years old, sharp as a tack, and had an almost supernatural ability to know everything that happened on their street before it actually happened. Sean had been carrying groceries in from the car on a Saturday morning when she appeared at her fence with a smile that was warm on the surface and absolutely lethal underneath. "I see you have a friend staying with you," she said pleasantly. The way she said friend contained an entire investigation. Sean kept his voice easy. "Just someone going through a tough time. Helping out." Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. The way people nod when they have already decided what they believe and are simply waiting for you to confirm it. "She's lovely," she said. "Lily seems very fond of her." Sean smiled, picked up his groceries, and went inside. And that was when he and Haley had the conversation. It happened at the kitchen table. Again, that table was becoming the place where everything real between them took place. Sean set down his coffee and said it plainly. "People are going to talk. They already are." Haley wrapped both hands around her mug. She didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had been quietly waiting for this moment. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to keep it simple," he said. "You're a friend. You needed a place. That's the story." She nodded. "That's also the truth." "It is," he agreed. But they both knew, in the way that two people sitting 3 feet apart and feeling the weight of the air between them always know, that Simple had already quietly left the building. The arrangement, as they called it, was straightforward. If anyone asked, Haley was a friend from his work who was between apartments. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that required explanation. She agreed without hesitation. And Sean told himself it was purely practical. But practical didn't explain why he found himself paying attention to things he had no business paying attention to. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking. The way she always checked on Lily before she went to sleep, standing in the doorway for just a moment like she was making sure the child was safe and real. The way she said his name, Sean, like it was simply a word but somehow never sounded like just a word. He started noticing her noticing him too. Small things. The way her eyes moved to him when Lily said something funny, like he was the person she most wanted to share the moment with. The way she always handed him his coffee without being asked anymore, because she had memorized his routine. The way she sometimes stopped mid-sentence and looked at him just a half-second too long before looking away. Neither of them said anything about any of it. They had an arrangement. A simple story. A clean and practical reason for existing in the same space. And yet, every evening on that couch felt less like two strangers tolerating each other and more like two people who had somehow always been comfortable in exactly this position. Sean caught himself one night. Lily asleep, house quiet, Haley reading beside him, thinking that this felt like something he had forgotten was possible. Not passion, not drama, just ease. The terrifying, disarming, completely unplanned ease of someone who fit. He closed his book, looked at the wall, and reminded himself firmly that this was temporary, that she was his ex's boss, that Clara's words were still sitting in the back of his mind like a quiet alarm he hadn't yet decided to turn off, that the story they were telling everyone else was just a story. He repeated that last part twice, because some part of him had already stopped believing it. If this story is already pulling at something in your chest, you are not alone. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think about Sean and Haley so far. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. There is so much more coming. Clara didn't call first. She never did. That had always been one of the defining qualities of Sean's ex-wife. She arrived when and how she chose, and she expected the world to simply rearrange itself around her entrance. Sean heard the car in the driveway on a Sunday afternoon. He recognized the sound of it before he even looked out the window. Some things the body remembers long after the heart has moved on. He was in the kitchen. Haley was in the living room with Lily, the two of them building something ambitious out of craft paper and tape that had already consumed most of the coffee table. Sean stepped to the window. Clara. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not love, not even anger anymore. Just the particular tension of someone who knew exactly how much disruption was about to walk through his door. He moved to the living room. Haley, he said quietly. She looked up. One look at his face told her everything. She rose slowly from the floor, smoothing her shirt, and in that single moment Sean watched her expression shift, not to fear, but to something careful and prepared, like someone who had been expecting a particular storm for a long time. Clara knocked twice and opened the door herself. She still had a key. Sean had told himself for 6 months that he needed to change the locks. He never had. She walked in with the particular confidence of someone who considered the space still partly hers, and then she stopped. Her eyes found Haley immediately. The room changed temperature. Haley. Clara's voice was flat, stripped of everything except the single sharp edge underneath it. Clara, Haley said quietly. Lily jumped up from the craft paper. Mommy. Clara's expression softened instantly for her daughter, a genuine warmth that Sean had never doubted. Whatever had broken between him and Clara, she loved Lily completely. She hugged the little girl, kissed her hair, then straightened up, and the warmth disappeared. Can I talk to you? Clara said to Sean. Not a question. Alone. They moved to the kitchen. Sean closed the door halfway. Through the gap, he could see Haley sitting back down on the floor beside Lily, picking up a piece of craft paper, keeping her hands busy and her eyes down. Clara wasted no time. How long has she been here? A couple of weeks, Sean said evenly. A couple of weeks. Clara repeated it like she was tasting something bitter. Sean, do you have any idea who she actually is? She needed help. She had nowhere to go. That is exactly what she wants you to think. Sean felt the old familiar weariness settle over him. The particular exhaustion of being told how to interpret what was directly in front of him. Clara. She got my last boss fired, Clara said sharply. Before she was my boss, she was a colleague. And she went above him, gathered complaints, exaggerated incidents, until he was removed. Then she took his position. The kitchen was very quiet. She does this, Clara continued. She finds situations. She finds people who are vulnerable, and she inserts herself, and she makes herself indispensable until she has exactly what she came for. Sean said nothing. He was looking at his ex-wife's face, at the absolute certainty living there, and trying to reconcile it with the woman in the next room who fixed cabinet doors and braided his daughter's hair and always left room in his coffee mug. Then Clara said the thing that cracked everything open. She knew about you before she knocked on that door, Sean. I told her about you. About the divorce. About the house. The silence that followed was enormous. She didn't end up here by accident. Everything you thought you understood just shifted. We know. Stay with us. Because the next part changes everything again. Sean stood in his kitchen for a long time after Clara left. He didn't move. Didn't reach for his coffee. Didn't do any of the small automatic things a person does when they are pretending to be fine. He just stood there and let Clara's words settle into him like cold water finding every crack. She knew about you before she knocked on that door. He thought about that night. The rain. The trembling. The 6 words that had dismantled every wall he had carefully built. I have nowhere else to go. Had that been real? Or had he been, as Clara said, a situation? A vulnerable person carefully identified and quietly approached? He thought about how naturally Haley had fit, how quickly Lily had trusted her, how effortlessly she had filled every silence. And for the first time, he wondered if effortless was actually the most dangerous thing in the world. He walked back into the living room. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, still holding a piece of craft paper, mouth slightly open, completely peaceful. Haley was sitting on the floor beside her. Not on the couch. On the floor. Like she had positioned herself as small and unimposing as possible. She looked up when Sean came in. She read his face immediately. He watched something move through her eyes. Not surprise, but a deep and quiet resignation. Like someone who had been waiting for a specific door to close and had just heard the handle turn. She told you, Haley said softly. It wasn't a question. Did you know about me before that night? Sean asked. His voice was level. He was proud of how level it was. Haley looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, yes. The word landed hard. Sean exhaled slowly. Looked at the wall. Looked at his sleeping daughter. She used to talk about you. Haley continued carefully. At the office. About the divorce. About Lily. About this house. She paused. When everything fell apart that night, I drove without thinking. And yes, I think part of me remembered what I knew. That you were someone who helped people. That you were safe. Safe. Sean repeated quietly. I know how that sounds. Do you? She flinched. Just slightly. But he saw it. I didn't come here with a plan, Sean, she said. I came here because I was drowning and I grabbed the only thing I could think of. That was real. Everything after it, that was real too. He wanted to believe her. That was the most frightening part of all of this. He wanted to believe her so completely that it scared him more than the possibility that she had lied. That night, after Lily was in bed, Sean sat alone in the kitchen. He heard Haley moving quietly in the living room. The soft sound of the pull-out couch. The small, careful sounds of someone trying very hard not to be a burden. And then, silence. And then, something he didn't expect. Her voice. Very quiet. Through the wall. I'm going to go, Sean. He closed his eyes. I've already called someone. A colleague from my old job. She has a spare room. I should have done this sooner. A pause. I'm sorry. For all of it. He heard the soft sound of her repacking the small bag that had never fully been unpacked. And something in his chest pulled so sharply it almost felt physical. He sat perfectly still. Because he had been here before. Had let someone walk out of his life while he sat with his hands around a coffee mug telling himself it was the right thing. And he had been wrong then. He was almost certain he was wrong now. But almost certain had never felt so terrifyingly insufficient. This is the moment everything balances on a single decision. Tell us in the comments, what would you do? And if you haven't liked this video yet, now is the time. Don't let Sean face this alone that he heard the zipper close on her bag. That small, final sound moved through the wall and landed somewhere inside Sean's chest that he hadn't known was still tender. He looked down at his hands. At the coffee mug he had been gripping without drinking from. At the kitchen table where every real conversation between them had happened. He thought about the first morning. The coffee already brewing. I left room for whatever you need. He thought about Lily's hair being braided by someone who had laughed, genuinely, suddenly, unguardedly, at a 6-year-old's question. He thought about the evenings on the couch. The comfortable silence. The half-second glances that both of them had been too careful to finish. And then he thought about what Haley had actually said. Not what Clara had framed it as. Not the version filtered through years of his ex-wife's particular way of seeing the world. What Haley had actually said. I came here because I was drowning and I grabbed the only thing I could think of. Sean knew what drowning felt like. He had been drowning for 2 years before that knock on the door. He just hadn't had anyone to grab onto. He stood up. The chair scraped back against the kitchen floor, and he was moving before he had finished deciding to move. Down the hallway, into the living room, where Haley was standing with her small bag over her shoulder and her coat already on. She turned when she heard him. Her eyes were dry. She had clearly decided to hold herself together for this part. To leave cleanly. To not make it harder than it already was. That restraint, that quiet, careful dignity, told him more about who she was than anything Clara had ever said. "Put the bag down," he said. She blinked. "Sean, I mean it. Put it down." She didn't move. "You heard what she said. You know I knew about you before I came here. You have every reason not to trust me, and I am not going to stand here and ask you to." "You're not asking," he said. "I'm telling." He crossed the room until he was close enough that she had to look up at him slightly. "Did you come here to take something from me?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Immediate. Absolute. Did you ever once make Lily feel anything other than safe?" Her eyes filled then. Just slightly. She pressed her lips together and shook her head again. "Has anything that happened in this house over the last 2 weeks felt like a performance to you?" A single tear escaped before she could stop it. "No," she whispered. "None of it." "Then put the bag down, Haley." She stood there for a long moment. The war inside her was visible on her face, the part that wanted to protect him from the risk of her, and the part that was so unbearably tired of leaving before anything real had the chance to grow. Slowly, she lowered the bag from her shoulder. It dropped softly to the floor, and Sean exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. He didn't reach for her. He didn't rush the moment. He simply stood in front of her in the quiet living room of the home he had built carefully and alone, and let the fact of her staying fill the space between them. "We figure it out," he said simply. "Whatever it is, we figure it out." Haley looked at him with something in her eyes that was fragile and luminous and terrifyingly close to hope. "I don't know what I did to deserve this," she said softly. Sean almost smiled. "You knocked," he said. "At 11 p.m. In the rain. That took something." Down the hall, Lily slept peacefully, unaware that the family she had been quietly, instinctively building around herself over 2 weeks had just decided, without fanfare, without grand declarations, to stay. Some of the most important decisions in a person's life arrive not with fireworks, but with a bag set softly on a living room floor. And a man who finally, after a very long time, stopped letting the right person walk out the door. If this story found something in you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories about the quiet, complicated, beautiful mess of being human. And tell us in the comments, did Sean make the right call? We read every single one.